Welcome to The Storytellers, the radio show and podcast that features those who choose to leave their mark on the world through the art of story. I'm your host, Grace Salmon. I look forward to our time together today. Now, let's meet our storyteller.
Peter Spears is an award-winning producer. He's an actor, a director, a writer, and he produced the Academy Award-winning Nomadland for Best Picture, the Academy Award-winning Call Me by Your Name for Best Adapted Screenplay, which was also nominated for Best Picture, and so many other films and so many other awards. I need to talk to him about all of them, including his newest projects. Peter, thank you for gracing the Storyteller's microphone.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I'd like to jump right in with preparing for your time with me today. I got a sense, almost in the way that in the old days I could tell a David O. Selznick movie by light and shadow. By learning more about your films, I get such a distinct feel for what Peter Spears wants to put in a movie. Something about pacing, something about otherness. Can you talk a little bit about what draws you to a movie?
Yeah. I mean, it's varied, certainly. I've sort of been drawn to the kinds of movies I've made as a producer, are the sorts of movies that I've loved as a moviegoer, as an actor, as a writer, and there sort of seemed to be a kind of vanishing breed of movies. I don't. I'm fortunate enough at this point in my career to be able to be a champion for these sorts of smaller stories and stories that go and tell something more about the internal life of their characters. The otherness, certainly a kind of queerness in its most broad interpretation of the word. I've been things that have resonated for me, and I've tried to find ways to move those stories along and get them made. With Call Me by Your Name was the first movie I produced and made. It was, a 10-year odyssey of trying to figure out how to put all those pieces together, mostly because nobody understood really in a more traditional way what the movie was. They just were like, well, nobody dies of a horrible sickness. Nobody's parents disown them. Nobody what are the stakes? And for me, it was the stakes were the stakes of the heart, and the story was as important a kind of story as any sort of, big budgeted sort of, effects film perhaps or something. So it took some convincing and finally the ability to just make the movie elsewhere, by maybe going and making it as a European co-production where there's more of a tradition still of making these sorts of films. A lot of the movies I've made have been co-productions, and the ability also to finally, show people like, okay, I can't keep describing what this movie is. Like, I think I just have to show you what the movie is. And of course, once we made the movie, people found it, and a lot of people really, came to champion it also. And a lot of, in that way, as you can imagine, even some folks who had said they didn't get it before, in the sort of abstract before it was made, coming around to being like, I see now, and the good news is it helped pave the way to make more movies like that.
Well, you did show them and they needed to see that. I think it's interesting that you talked about how it's a smaller story. And there certainly is in Nomadland. You opened my eyes in that film. I did not realize the breadth of people who live such a nomadic existence. So they are smaller stories, but they are huge in impact. Did you have any idea that that would win the Academy Award for Best Picture?
I mean, no is the answer. You have never had any idea that that'll be the case. We certainly had hopes that we would make something special and unique. I had known Frances through my husband, who had been her agent for many years. We had never worked together, but while we were on the award circuit for going to lots of those festivals and award shows for Call Me by Your Name, Frances was doing the same circuit with 3 billboards. And so we got to spend a lot of time together. And Chloé had her movie, The Rider, Chloé Zhao, the director. So we had gotten to sort of know each other beyond just sort of passing hellos, and became up with the idea that perhaps this book could be a movie of some sort. I mentioned my husband. He was the first one to read the book, and he gave it to me and to Frances and said, maybe there's a movie here. Now, when we first optioned it, we thought that the movie would be Frances playing the lead character from the book. Chloé had a different idea when she saw it, and she thought, well, what if I love this, but what if we did something a little different? What if we created a new character and lived amongst the folks out there living this way, the nomads, and find the story, and we ended up finding a story that, again, while certainly new to many of us, that there was a community of people living this way. What at the end of the day, the movie is a story of a woman dealing with grief and the loss of community. And as the gods of cinema would have it, by the time we were done shooting after 5 months, Chloé had been hired to do a Marvel film. And so she left and went off to London to do that film and didn't edit the movie for several months, our movie. She was immersed in this new film. And then COVID happened, everything shut down, and she was in Ojai at her house, and she had all the footage from Nomadland, and she just spent several weeks alone editing that movie, and called and said, hey, it's done. And, I don't know, would the movie have resonated in the same ways a year earlier if it had stayed on that sort of time frame that it was on originally? The fact was, now we were all it wasn't just one woman's story of grief and loss. It was now all of us had been experiencing so much, grief and loss in the first year of the pandemic. And I think the movie really just was the right movie at the right time in that way.
So timing is really interesting. You talk about Call Me by Your Name, and that was, I love the expression, you're an overnight success, but that was a 10-year overnight success to be nominated for Best Picture and then to win the Academy for Best Adapted Screenplay. How important is timing then? I mean, you just talked about it again.
Yeah.
And is that something you can pick?
Yeah, no. I mean, I think you have to keep several irons in the fire, working on several projects at a time, and moving them along. You never know, a strike will happen, like we're working on a couple projects right now, and they've, had been until lately stopped in their path with, the idea of the strike. And certainly, as I said, the pandemic before that with another movie. And so timing is a part of it, the vagaries of life. The fate smiles or frowns in different ways. Weather, and the fact that, like with Call Me by Your Name in particular, that movie could only be shot in the summertime. So you really only had one time a year to make that movie. Every year we would be sort of lined up trying to get it made for summer. But if something fell out, an actor left, a director changed, we have to wait a whole nother year to be back on that runway. And so, there's a million things that can factor into how you get a movie made, or the challenges in getting a movie made. And while, it was 10 years for Call Me by Your Name, Nomadland came together in 10 months. I've got another project that is coming out later this year called Drift with Cynthia Erivo. It's a movie that Cynthia and I have been working on together for now longer than 10 years. It was a movie actually that Bill Paxton had been wanting to make. He had optioned the book first, and he had met Cynthia and wanted to make with Cynthia. And he had asked me several weeks before he was going to have open heart surgery to help him produce that film. He had seen Call Me by Your Name and really loved it. And I said, of course, I'd help him. He was another friend of my husband's and a longtime client. And so I think looking back on it now, he was probably trying to get his affairs in order in case the surgery didn't go well. It was open heart surgery, and sadly, as we know, it had complications, and he passed away. So, as a sort of memory to him, and in his honor and memory, we've been trying to get that movie made. And it's a tiny film, and it's a refugee story, and it's a film that we made with some of my partners from Call Me by Your Name, producing partners, and we shot in Greece a few years ago now. And Cynthia gives just an incredible performance. I mean, really, truly one of, like, you've never seen anything like this performance. But a tiny little movie. And again, you talk about timing. It's a story about a woman whose family was massacred in Liberia when Charles Taylor was deposed, and where she finds herself on a Greek island, alone and untethered from the world, and her beginning to take the first steps to trying to put her life back together. And of course, who would have known we'd be living through such times right now, with so much of trying to understand and really put a face on and remember the humanity of all these refugees all over the world, and where they are. So the way, again, getting back to your original question, the way timing works in every aspect of storytelling, whether it's at the movie makers or it's writers or journalists or whatever, plays a really big part.
I've become fascinated in recent months with just producing. Quite honestly, I just, the credits roll, I go, there's a producer, that's nice. He or she is the person who gets the money together. But it is really such an amazing combination of puppet master God, getting the money, product placement, cast, other partnerships. How did you come to be so good at producing?
Well, it's a skill set, I mean, that I think I've always had to some degree. Like, I mean, I'm a big fan of, like, a clipboard and a punch list, and I like to, check things off and be, in sort of control of projects and things. Like, and as I began at my career as an actor, I was always coming in very late in the creative process. It was really, projects had already been cooking for a long time and developing, and there wasn't a lot of need for me to come in with sort of my artistic voice, other than my ability to read the lines and deliver them in a way that was what the director and writer had hoped for. And so I began to also do some writing, which was, a little more of that ability to be involved with the process. But slowly, just, and then I directed a little bit, but I kind of just step by step realized I wanted to be there from soup to nuts. I wanted to find the project. I wanted to read the book. Usually, in my case, I do mostly film adaptations of books. I want to find the writer. I want to work with the writer on the script. I'm going to look for the money. I'm going to work with the director, help to find the director, and work with the director on casting, and be on set for the, all the shooting, be involved in the editing, giving notes to the director, involved in the marketing, so every bit of it now, as a producer, as a creative producer, is something I have a hand in, and something that an ability for me to, certainly, I think, as my biggest job as a producer, is to be the champion of the director's voice and make sure the director's vision is realized. But it is in a kind of, dance with also being supportive of that and offering in ways that are helpful opinions, knowing when to step back when opinions aren't necessarily needed, or juggling many opinions from lots of different people, other producers, financiers, studio, and finding, let's make sure that this doesn't become an amalgam of too many ideas and too many visions, but that we kind of keeping our eye on the ball here. So I don't know that I could have done this at 20 or 30 or even 40 years old. It was a good career for me to segue into at 50, because I'd learned some of the other things I knew so many different areas of the business. I'd been an actor, I've been a director, I've been a writer. So I had a shorthand often with all these folks as a producer, and it's been nice to find, morph into this at this stage, and then also to be the producer who can be the one who has the patience and the time to push those more challenging projects up the hill, the ones that are not as easy for the money people to see and stuff.
I'm amazed at the level of detail and the level of your involvement. I would think it's fabulous to be that involved on set, making notes, etc. You're also very involved in post-production. You're in post-production now on Swift Horses, I believe.
Yes, that's right. So we are, now that the strike is over, our actors are able to come back and do some ADR work, looping and some line changes. Our writer can fix some lines here and there, and all the things we discover in editing, where, this is the work of that moment now. So we are, yes, we very involved in that. Now, not all producers are. Some producers are, as you described it earlier, just money folks, and they come in and they're just going to give the money. And usually when you're watching a movie, that's denoted by the credit of executive producer. So when you see in movies, when you see executive producer, it's different in television. That often these are the people who were involved financially. And the producers, as a separate category, are the folks who may have been involved financially, but they also were, carrying a little more of the creative load of a project, and the nuts and bolts of it. How is the money being allocated day? Not just writing a check, but how are we using that money every day? And what's the budgets, and what are the scheduling, and what's all that kind of stuff. Often that's also called a line. More specifically, the person who only does that and doesn't have anything really creatively to do with the project is a line producer. So the line producer has the budget. The line producer is dealing with the daily schedule. Me as a creative producer is also involved with that, but I'm sort of the person kind of running between all those areas and keeping everyone sort of together and making sure the train arrives in the station.
I love it. In 2020, you created your own company, Corcordium, loosely translated Heart of Hearts, which I thought was absolutely a delightful name, thinking about how much you loved films. But of course, I discovered that as I was watching Bones and All, which I had a totally different spin on why you might have called your company that. For those of our viewers who don't know about this film, which has just come out, it is a must-see. I want to say it's about cannibalism, but it's not. It's a love story.
No. I mean, cannibalism in this movie is yes, it's a love story, and cannibalism is a metaphor for otherness or a kind of queerness, and so it is. It's a sort of Grand Guignol sort of experiment that was really also a wonderful reuniting of me with, as a producer, getting to work again with Luca Guadagnino, who directed Call Me by Your Name, and Timothée Chalamet, who starred so beautifully in Call Me by Your Name. And so it's, yes, very different milieu, but in lots of ways, so very much, so wonderfully, everything people love about Luca is in that movie. The singular vision, even if it was a kind of horror story, it's just, the attention to detail and the mise en scène of it all is so rich and so deep. And you've got this incredible performance from Mark Rylance also, and you've got revisiting and coming back again Michael Stuhlbarg, who played the father so beautifully in Call Me by Your Name, unrecognizable here in this movie, playing a very out there character. But it was it was a little more rock and roll maybe than the Call Me by Your Name. If the Call Me by Your Name was a little more a beautiful kind of classical piece, classical music piece, this is a little more. And Trenton Atticus, who did the score, is just really, I think, a pretty special film, and people who are finding it now are having a really great experience of the movie. And to be clear, Corcordium actually, I hadn't even thought about that. It's sort of the irony of it as regards Bones and All, and in particular one scene. But Heart of Hearts actually comes from the book of Call Me by Your Name, and it is in Latin, and it's something Oliver wrote to Elio on a postcard when he leaves. He sends him it just says Heart of Hearts in his sort of
Oh,
way of thing. And so it's not in the movie, but it's in the book, and it's, for those, it's like, if you know sort of thing. And so anyway, that's the
thank you for
origin of that.
sharing that
Yeah, for
part.
sure.
Yes, trust me, I wouldn't have put those things together if I
No,
wasn't.
no, you wouldn't have.
But that's a beautifully cast film too. Bones and All. I just
Yeah.
in the movies that I've seen of yours, and now I need to go back and do more. You don't seem in a rush to tell a story. And is that true of your other films, or is it just? I love that you're not in a rush.
Yeah, I mean, I like to sit. I like films to sit. I mean, these are the sorts of directors I like to work with. So, but yes, I respond to directors and stories that want to sit with our characters a bit and get to know them. And on Swift Horses, the new movie we're doing is a little more plot forward, and it's not really a heist film, but in some ways there's some there's just more going on story wise, which means you've got to be very judicious in what you're going to use that way to tell the story, and what you use to help continue to develop the characters emotionally. But I remember seeing Nomadland during the pandemic, because nobody was going to movie theaters. All the IMAX movie theaters were closed, and but because none of the big, everyone had held back their big Marvel films and their big superhero films until they wanted to see when people would start coming back to the theaters. So IMAX had the idea. They said, well, let's show Nomadland in IMAX. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine what that is like on IMAX, to see a story that intimate, that slow in the development, the just sitting on Frances's face in that massive, format, and just being with her in those ways. And it was really transformative. Like they should show a lot more movies in IMAX in that way, because it held your attention as much as any chase sequence, as much as any sort of space battle, and maybe even more so in ways. And and it wasn't, and we were just fine to sit as long as the camera and the director wanted to sit in the moment with them. And so that's the magic of movies, and that's for me, and that's the spiritual part of movies. And that's where I go for that kind of you know experience, for something that sort of touches the human spirit. So I don't want to race through that. I want to sit with that for a moment, and have been lucky enough to find directors who feel the same way.
Does winning an Academy Award change you or change your work?
Ooh, I mean, no, it doesn't change me, and the work is still the work. It's like, but the ability that maybe something doesn't take 10 years to make the case of why that might be a movie is certainly there. It's very much the fact now that, like, if they don't quite get what it is, and it doesn't quite make sense, if you're pitching this film to somebody, they might take a little more of like a flyer on it, because they're just like, okay, maybe that. But what it also has done is really, when that happens, is the ability for people to come see movies that they wouldn't have seen, is remarkable. So the fact that Nomadland, Call Me by Your Name, all these films will be on airplanes now. They're on, they're on wherever it is. Folks are going to find the movie in ways that they wouldn't have before. So it sort of guarantees a little more of a life for a film,
Sure.
and in ways that when you've put so much of yourself into the making of it, feels very gratifying to know that it's going to, has a little asterisk next to it in film history. So it's nice feeling.
I'm sure. I am very struck by your collaborativeness. When I read your bio, it's filled with other people's names. It doesn't say, I produced this, I directed that. It's in there, but you are very much other focused. Would you talk about that?
Well, I mean, that's the nature of independent filmmaking. Like it takes a village, it takes two villages, it takes villages from all around the world. Like we have, all the movies I've made have been, had folks from in all the departments and different financiers and all of that coming together to tell a story because we were all moved by it in some way. So I guess, for me, that you start with this idea, this sort of perfect idea of what something might be, but as you start to bring together your co-creators and collaborators and your fellow filmmakers, it becomes its own story, and you sort of sit back a little bit and you let it start to find its own way, like a child, like being a parent, and you're going, and when they ultimately take those first steps and go out into the world, you're sort of, you hold your breath and you wonder that, like, did this collaboration, like, did you capture this kind of lightning in a bottle or not? And the more you, like most things, right? That lesson over and over, the more you release, the more you let it sort of do its thing, the more it flies, and the less you try to control that. So it's about, I love the collaboration of working with all these incredible artists, and I love the give and the take, and I love the ability to tell stories in all the different ways, and to go around I've been lucky enough to travel around the world and find different collaborators and learn different ways that they tell stories and make movies, and to come back with that. And it's like constantly for me, like being in like film school over and over again. Each movie feels like another year of another great opportunity to learn about movie making, and so much to catch up on, right? The history of it's so long. And so to have the gratefulness at this point to be able to be in the sandbox with all these folks and making something is great, and I know it won't last forever. So I'm hopeful to get to do it, for as much as possible, but to still champion those stories that are, don't get championed enough. And I really feel like Drift, that's coming out, is one of those movies. On Swift Horses will be too, and I think that they'll feel like more, hopefully, a part of, like, you'll continue to see that connective tissue between all these stories.
And you're also really committed to helping others find their light, if you will. You're involved with Outset Young Filmmakers Project, which I thought sounded really wonderful, that you help other people play in the sandbox. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a project from that we co-created many years ago now, when we sort of realized that there was, in Hollywood, it was very easy for the kids of, like, the Hollywood executives and studio folks and people who'd kind of already found their way through all the doors and gates of Hollywood and were already working. Those kids seem to have the ability to network in a sort of entree into the business, that kids who were not as fortunate to be born, into, like, having parents who were doing this already, were, that there was more of a wall there, that they didn't see, that even though they were growing up in Los Angeles, they didn't see a pathway for themselves to find, to be working in this company town in this way, right? And in all the different ways, if they did know about it, they thought, oh, I have to be an actor, I have to be a director. But there's, hundreds, thousands of different ways you can be a part of working in making movies and television. And so we thought, and how specifically with the Gay and Lesbian Center of Los Angeles and with OutFest, the Gay and Lesbian Transgender Bisexual Film Festival here, thought that, like, how can we create a mentoring program for those young people that not only shows them, yes, they learn some tools, like they'll make a project and they'll start with an idea and they'll work together to make like a short film or a system, and at the end of many months they have something to kind of show for it. But more importantly, what they have also made are contacts and networking, and they've met adults in the program. In the program, they've met adults who are also working in Hollywood in lots of different ways. And so they've begun the process of opening those doors for themselves when they graduate. If they go to school, many often don't. They go right into working, and this has opened a lot of doors for a lot of young people to find their way to help telling stories also.
Peter, thank you for helping so many people tell stories. Thank you for sharing yours and for giving us such amazing stories throughout the years. I look forward to Drift and On Swift Horses and to so many more things. Thanks for being with us on The Storytellers.
Thank you, Grace. It was nice to spend a Sunday this way.
Take care.
That concludes this episode of The Storytellers. I'm so glad you could be part of the story today. I hope you share the stories, tell your own, and come back for another episode. Because when our stories are told, everything changes. I'm Grace Salmon.